Could everybody raise their hand if they've heard of the blockchain? Okay, keep your hand up if you feel like you could stand up here and explain it. Okay, good. One or two. I almost feel like it should be you up here, Paul. So, I'm going to do two things. Firstly, I'm going to reveal my secret identity. Then I'm going to talk about why the blockchain might be what it takes to unbreak the humanitarian disaster. Right? So my secret identity is I've been in the humanitarian innovation game 15 years with a shelter project called the Hexayart, which is the ancestor of both the IKEA shelter and the Wiki House. It is the original open source building. They build about $1 million worth of these things a year at Burning Man. It is the dominant shelter for hard weather camping in America. It looks like this. Walls are a whole 4x8 sheet. Roof pieces are a half sheet cut in half. You can mass produce these things in near infinite quantity anywhere in the world from the end of the industrial supply chain with nothing more expensive than a table saw and a screw gun. Does this sound like it could have been a really interesting innovation for the humanitarian sector? Yeah, right, you'd think. 15 years later, nothing but a sea of closed doors because it lasts too long. You put them into what's meant to be a temporary disaster. It bridges the gap between development aid and disaster response. The political consequences of putting people in permanent buildings when you are meant to be there, getting in and out again in 6 months when the TV cameras move, are completely unacceptable inside of the space. And as a result, something which costs less to deploy than tents is up on blocks, being widely ignored by the entire sector. It doesn't fit the business model. This is where the blockchain is. It is by far the best way of building an open society that you're ever going to see. It produces a better democracy than democracy. It produces better money than money. It allows people to convene in a truly democratic fashion to write the rules of their own society, locally, nationally, globally, inside of consortia, or anything else. It uses software to let people write their own law. The first thing that anybody did with this was an anonymous group, still anonymous, built a thing called Bitcoin. Bitcoin was essentially the central bank of the internet. It was a currency directly convened by peers, which had international fungibility, and which to this day is the first example of a citizen-driven attempt to reform international finance. So this is an extraordinarily powerful set of technology. When the first thing you do is create a central bank of the internet, what do you think Act 2 is going to be like? My money is on global democracy. But we're dealing with an instrument which has the power to produce change at this level, and as a result, there's a lot of fear and confusion, but especially fear. So the blockchain is a simple thing. Over here in the 1970s, in the darkness, we have the prehistory where the database was developed. And at this point in history, a database was a room of machines that had 1-inch wide magnetic tape in them. And that room of machines was so fragile that if you got a stray hair in it, it would wreck the entire thing. It could physically destroy your data in one of the magnetic tape drives. So people would wear white suits in these things, specifically so you didn't contaminate the machines. And this is where the silo mindset around your organizational data is born. The original silo is the database. It's super fragile. If something goes wrong, there's no fixing it. And this is where that whole feeling that your IT infrastructure is incredibly fragile, and if something goes wrong, you're never going to fix it, lives. That's how IT was in the 70s. If it looks that way today, your organization is out of date. You come across the 1990s. This is the kind of PC era. At this point, the IT infrastructure is appliances, and it's one per desk, rather than back in the 70s where it was one computer per organization. And the one per desk era is dominated by computer networking, because one computer per desk means that to build an institutional picture of reality, you need to have these machines networked. And the network era expands for the next 20 years, predominantly as the web, but then as mobile phones and now Internet of Things and a few other technologies. So the network is penetrating into everything. Pretty soon it'll be in our smart glasses. See you all much better now. And as a result, we've got this total awareness of what's happening in the world at all times. From this, we then filter and filter and filter and filter until we have an operational picture that shows us what we want to know about reality rather than being swamped by the enormous sea of incoming data. And this is quite important because the picture of the world that we want to see is the picture that allows us to take action. And most of the time, what we want to take action about is rooted right in our personal lives. It's a very close-up world. So we come across to 2010, we get the third major wave of innovation, which is blockchains. And the blockchain simply takes the database and the network and merges them into a single system so that everywhere that you have data, you have network, and everywhere that you have network, you have data. There is no connecting to the database, there is simply the database. And to make a database which everybody can access simultaneously at the same time, you have to give up the idea of editing, because if 58 people are editing the same piece of data, who is to say what the actual situation is? It's a very, very difficult thing. So instead of editing, we simply have publishing, and it's publishing of facts which are immutable. Once it is spoken, it cannot be unspoken. Every single statement is signed by the author of the statement. And in Bitcoin, this was a method of sending essentially checks. I send Bob 5 Bitcoin from my account balance of 20 Bitcoin. Put it into the network checks I have 20 Bitcoin. Everybody on the network gets a copy of the check. Bob, who is looking at his network, sees that he has indeed been given the check. And the check is the payment, because everybody can see the check, everybody knows what the payment is. So if you think of this as being kind of a database which is distributed through all of the machines, and it takes statements of fact from individuals, locks them into an immutable register, and when you want to know what's going on, you check the register, you now understand the blockchain well enough to reason about it without making big mistakes. Not that complicated. The work that was done to make it work is just as complicated as all the stuff that happens inside of your Wi-Fi chips, all the stuff that happens inside of your big Oracle databases. There's an astonishingly complex stack of stuff underneath it. The web was just this technically complicated in its day. Do not worry about not understanding the technology. You don't understand your mobile phone, you don't care, right? There's been an enormous fetish for explaining Bitcoin. You don't need to know. You need to know what it does, right? So, why is this a big deal for the humanitarian sector? The reason this matters is this. On the Bitcoin network, there is no center of the universe. There is nobody who is in charge. On the Ethereum network, there is no center of the universe. There is nobody who is in charge. The software is genuinely peer-to-peer. What that means is that you don't get the problem of asking whose technology we're using. We're just using the technology. Everybody who has a copy of the software and is running the software is a full peer. Now, as we all know, and I don't think anybody would disagree, all of the worst problems in the humanitarian space are bureaucratic, right? It's not that hard to put up tents or hexayards or filter water or do any of these things, right? It's not that difficult. The problems are entirely bureaucratic, and the first question that we have in any kind of crisis is who's on first and who's getting the credit, right? So figuring out who's on first is the question of seniority in the disaster. Everybody brought their own funding, so nobody gets to tell them what to do, and the result is the UN cluster system. It used to have a slightly longer name. The UN cluster system doesn't really work because there is no IT infrastructure which adequately supports genuine peer collaboration in an environment without hierarchy. So if you were to slide some IT infrastructure under the cluster system that genuinely allowed these institutions to be seen as full peers on a network where they could share their actions and plans, and everybody could see what everybody else is doing, it might provide a huge jump in effectiveness, a genuine quantum leap in effectiveness of the cluster system, which it could badly use. The other place where it comes in is who gets the credit. If every single action which is taken, the well is dug, the food is distributed, if every action which is taken has pictures which are taken and logged on a blockchain, and you could track back the spending through this permanent record to say these small donations were gathered up through these vehicles, they were put into this set of banks, and then they were transferred over here, and it went down there, and this is where it was given out. You could see where every single dollar spent actually went. and the people that did good work could claim the credit. And there are lots of projects like this. My company, Consensus, is working on one which is called Boardroom, and Paul's partner to that. Mark Chalmer of Akvo, right up here, he's working on a project called Giving OS, building on top of the Akvo legacy. It's just not that hard to envisage how this stuff could produce a massive change, and I hope you'll have lots of fun learning about it and talking to us about it in the next few days. Thank you.